Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and welcome back to our Endless Runner tutorial series where we're looking at all the basics you need to make a fun little Endless Runner game. So, the next thing we're going to make now is a score manager system to keep track of the score and keep track of the high score of the player and to be able to show it on the screen. So, we're going to need to show some text on the screen. Basically, we're going to need to show the score up here in the corner and a high score in the other corner. And the way we do that is we go to Game Object up here, then UI, and we select Text. And what that does is it automatically creates this thing called a canvas, which is what Unity uses as a built-in to display any kind of like UI stuff. So any kind of buttons you want to click or anything like that, or text you want to show on the screen. And as you can see, it creates our little bit of text down here in the corner, but in our scene view it's a big massive thing. And what we have to do is, if we zoom out, this is essentially the size of our screen. I'm just going to change this back to normal mode here. So we've got a text. It's really hard to see, so we're going to change the color of that to start off with. We're going to change this to, if we click on the black color bar here, we're going to change this to just a white color, and we're going to change our font style to bold, just to make it a bit more obvious. And we'll actually make it a bit bigger too. So 20, not 2214, 22 is what we want. Okay, so being down here in the bottom left corner is no good to us. We want to put it up here in the top where it makes a little bit more sense. So all we do is we just click on the box here and drag it up, and as you can see, it moves on our screen down below. Even though it's way higher than where our player is here, the UI stuff works on its own little scale, basically. So we don't want it in the exact top corner. We want to pull it in a little bit, round about there, and we want to change the text just so we know what we're using here. We don't want to just be called new text. So in this box here, we're going to write score : 0. So that's going to be our score that we start off with. We're going to rename this object to score text, just so we know which object we're dealing with. And one other thing we're going to do, so the way that Unity handles this UI kind of stuff is it arranges things as best it can. We've got this arrangement setting here, where we click on it, we can get some different options. But at the moment, it's arranged basically from the middle of the frame. So what it's doing is saying, okay, our score label is about this much away from the middle, and this much away from the middle left, and this much away from the middle up. So if we maximize our game window like this, now we can see our score is floating kind of here in the middle. We don't want that. That's not going to be much use to us at all. So we're going to make it smaller again. And what we're going to do is click on this, and we're going to click in the top left. So then it's working out the distance from the top left. So now if we maximize it again, we can see the score stays up in the corner just like the way we want it to. There's lots of different settings you can use for it. You can make it kind of stretch in size and stuff like that as well. So mess around with those options and see which ones you like best, because it's down to personal preference really. So we've got a score. We're going to duplicate this. So we'll right click and duplicate, or just press Ctrl and D, and we're going to call this duplicate high score text, like that. And we're going to drag this one over to the other side, about here say, and we're going to make this a top right anchor, and instead of being aligned to the left like that, we're going to make it be aligned to the right just by clicking that, just as a normal kind of the same way you'd use in like Microsoft Word or anything like that, or any kind of text editor. And we'll just change what the text says just so we can remember what it is. So here we go, high score. And as you can see, we've only got a tiny little bit of space here now. So say if our high score was up to like 10,000 or something, then our text is going to get chopped off here. So what we're going to do is, actually just to demonstrate that, we'll just say high score and a whole load of zeros. We're losing out all those extra zeros there, so we're going to get rid of them. That would be a very high score to get in the game, but we're going to get rid of them. We're going to drag that over to roughly the middle, and we'll do the same with the score as well, just so we know we have a little bit of extra space to play around with. We'll actually drag high score over a little bit more, since it's got the word high in front of it, so it needs a bit more space. Okay, So now we've got the basics of our label set up. Now we need a way to control those scores and to control what's going on. So what we're going to do is create a new object that's going to be used as our score manager script, basically. So on our canvas, if we right click on that and create an empty, it'll create a child object, and we're going to call this score manager, and it doesn't matter where it is, it's fine there in the middle. And we're going to create a new script in our script folder. So we're going to go here and we're going to go C# script, and we'll call this score manager. So we're going to open this up in MonoDevelop, and once this is opened, so when we wanted to use lists in an earlier episode, we had to use a thing called system.collection.generic. But for using the UI stuff within Unity, we have to do something similar. We have to type at the top using Unity Engine .ui. So that if you want to use any of the like text objects and stuff like that within Unity, you need to call this in so that you can access them and be able to put text into where our score is here. So basically we have our two text objects. We've got our score text and our high score text, so we're going to need to create some references to them. So we're going to say public text score text and public text high score text, just like that. And obviously we're going to need some values for both of these things. We're going to need a score tracker and a high score tracker, so we need some floats. So we're going to create we'll make them public because we're going to do some things with these. So public float score count, so that'll be our score counter, and public float high score count, and that'll be our high score counter. And so what we're going to need, if we're going to be keeping a track of our score, we obviously need to know the way our score system is going to work is as the player is moving along, he's gathering more and more score. We'll probably add pickups and stuff like that along the game so that you can add extra bonuses of score and stuff. But for the moment, we're just starting off with the default. The player's moving, and the longer you survive for, the higher your score becomes. So if your score is going up the whole time, we need to know how much score we're going to get as we run along. So we obviously need a value for that. So if we go back in here, we're going to need a public float, and we're going to call this points per second. And of course, when the player is dead, so when the player falls off the screen, hits the bottom, we don't want his score to continue going up. But that's the point where we want the score to stop. So we need a boolean to which is a true or a false object, basically. We've used them before. We need a boolean to determine if the score should be going up at the moment or if it should be stopped. And when the player gets killed, basically we'll just set the score to not be able to go up. So here we'll say public bool, and we'll call it score increasing. Not increasing, just increasing. There we go. So our start, we're not going to do anything. Before we do anything else, we're just going to look at how to add the text to how to add the score to these text objects here. So it's very, very straightforward and very, very simple. So say our score text, which will be this one here, once we hook them up, our score text will be, the way to set that will just be score text dot text. So basically what we're saying is the score text object, which is this whole thing, and we're accessing the text within that object, which is what says score 0. So score text dot text is equal to, we want to make sure we keep score written on the screen. So we're going to say score, colon, and a space. So basically this is just a string that will be printed out onto the screen. And we have to put a space here because that's what we want. We want to make sure there's a space between the word and the number, because it will literally print out exactly what you tell it to. So if you leave that out, you'll just be left with no spaces there at all, and it'll just be jammed together and it won't be very good. So score with the space plus our score count. So that'll be our score counter, and as that increases, we'll be adding that onto our score text here. And we do the exact same thing for our high score text. High score text.text is equal to high score colon and a space plus high score count. And if we'll just show how that works here. If we go back in, so we go to our score manager and we're going to add that script to it now. Once we finish compiling down here, we should be able to add it. So we've got our score manager like that. We need to grab our score text and pop him there, and our high score text and pop him there. So we're just going to set a default value of, say, our score count will be 5 and our high score will be 50. As you can see, we've got 0 and 0 here, but now once we play the game, we should get a score of 5 and a high score of 50. So there you go. As you can see, that's exactly working perfectly fine for us. That's exactly what we wanted to happen. I'm going to turn off maximize on play here because we want to keep things sensible. Okay, so now we know that those work. And we've got a space here for our points per second. We're going to set that to 5 for now, just so we have an amount that we can use. Okay, so how are we going to add score onto the player? Basically, the most straightforward way is, rather than adding 5 on every frame of animation, what we do is take our number 5 and divide that by the length of time that is taken for each frame to be created. And rather than having to work that out in some crazy mathematical way, it's a system already built into Unity. So all we have to do is score count. Oh, if I could type, that would be okay. Score count plus equals, so this will be our score count. We're adding on every frame, we're adding on our points per second, which is 5, multiplied by time dot delta time. So what time dot delta time is essentially the time it's taken from the last update loop to the current one. So each frame of animation on the screen basically is the amount of time in between that is time dot delta time, and it'll be a very, very small and tiny amount. So say it'll be 0.1, it'll be much smaller than 0.1, but say it's 0.1, basically let's say, so 5, which is our points per second, multiplied by 0.1, so that'll be 0.5 of a second, or sorry, 0.5 points. And basically, so then every frame it'll add 0.5 points, and then as it adds up to 1 second, it'll be exactly 5 points. So that's exactly what we want that to do. So if we save that, pop back in here again, and hit play, we should see our score will go up as we're running along. So there you go. As you can see, our score is going up, but it looks kind of ugly. Because we're dividing our points per second for each frame, we're ending up with 0.61 point blah 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 blah, all these extra numbers. It's kind of confusing. It's not something you really want your players to see. You'd rather have your players just seeing whole numbers on the screen. Actually, if we just demonstrate, we can set the points per second to 1 just to make it a little bit slower. So we can see it goes up a little bit slower like that. So that's not use to us. So we want to just show a whole number. And the way we can do that, rather than affecting the score count itself, because we don't want to make that a solid whole number, or else we'll be adding on a whole load of things all the time, and that won't be any good to us. What we're going to do is, when it's sent to our score text object, we're going to make that a whole number. So we're going to say, instead of just being plus score count, we're going to say plus matf, and matf is just like a math function within Unity. So matf.round, and then we're going to put brackets around our score count. And what that'll do is round our score count value to the nearest whole number. So that'll be, so we're basically eliminating all the points that we have. And we're going to have to do the exact same thing for our high score count as well, although we haven't shown that working yet. But we might as well set it up here now so that it does the exact same thing. So there we go. So now we've got our score count increasing, and we've got a space for our score text and our high score text. So how do we know what our high score is? Well, basically, our high score is just going to be a value that is the furthest the player has currently reached. So all we have to do is say if score count is greater than high score count. So basically, it'll start off at 0, and as the score increases, it'll add more on the high score count. So if score count is greater than high score count, then high score count is now equal to our score count. So that way, our new high score will be set every time. And one other thing we need to do, as we said, when our player dies, we want his score to stop increasing. So we're going to need to be able to stop our score increasing when this value isn't true. So before that, we're going to say if score increasing, and we'll put a curly bracket there, and then just after this we'll put another one. We'll just space that over to make it look nice. So now we know this, our score will only increase as long as this value is true. And to show that working, so we have it marked as untrue to start off with, and we should see once we start playing the game, our score won't go up. Oh, we still have these values set by default. We'll get rid of them in a minute. But as you can see, our score isn't increasing, and then if we turn this on, now our score is starting to go up. We've got our whole numbers all sorted out here, and high score count is, well, that's just not being called yet at all. As you can see, it's working just the way we want it to be, which is perfect. And if we can beat our high score here, if I can manage it, there we go. Now we can see our high score going up and up and up, just like that. But of course, now the problem is when our player gets killed, first of all, his score increasing isn't stopping increasing, and his score isn't being reset back to 0, which is obviously what we want to do. So the way we're going to handle that is in our game manager, which our game manager is our object that's handling our player restarting and everything like that. So we're going to open up our game manager script by double clicking on it here. And once this is open, basically we're just going to create a reference to our new score manager object. So we're going to say, we'll just say private score manager, and we'll just call this object the score manager, like that. And we're going to make it automatically find the score manager in the scene, because there'll only be one. Why would you be managing multiple different versions of the same score? So the score manager is equal to find object of type score manager. Perfect. So we have our score manager now, and then down in our restart function here, basically as soon as the player gets killed, which is right here, we're going to say the score manager dot score increasing, which is our boolean value, is equal to false. So that'll make the score stop increasing. But we don't want it immediately to set the score back to 0. We want the player, during that time that he has to wait and see where he died, he has a second to go, okay, this is the score I got in the game. So we won't reset it to 0 straight away. We'll wait till the last moment before the game starts again to reset the value back to 0. So just after this, after the last line here, we're going to create a little bit of space and say the score manager dot score count is equal to 0, and then the score manager dot score increasing is equal to true. So we've got our score increasing again from 0 once the player has died. So we'll save that, pop back in here, and we'll just save this, and we hit play. Oh, okay, hold on. That was a mistake. We just go back to our score manager. We'll reset these back to 0 because we don't want them to have a value to start off with. And we want to make sure score increasing is on by default. That's what we need to have happening. Okay, so now we see our score going up, our high score is going up, and as we're running along, if I just let the player die, so there we go, we'll reset back to 0, and our high score is staying at 29, just the way we wanted it to. Kill ourselves again. As you can see, every time we're being reset back to 0, just the way we wanted, and keeping things nice and simple. So there you go. That's the basics of how to add a nice little simple scoring system to the game. It's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. But the only problem with it right now is if we die. Okay, so we've got a high score of 51. If we stop the game and restart the game again, once it gets going, we can see, oh, our high score is reset back to 0 every single time. And that's not really what we want at all. What we want is to be able to keep a permanent high score value, and there's a very, very simple way to do that. So if we go back to our score manager here, what we're going to use is a thing called player prefs. And player prefs are basically a very simple and straightforward save system for the game. And basically all we do is, so where our high score is being set to our new high score is being reached, basically we're going to set a player prefs value every time. So what we're going to do is, when our high score is equal to score count, we're going to say player prefs and then a bracket. And what we do is, player prefs set float. That's what we need to do. As we can see, if we go into a bracket here, we've got a string and we've got a float value. So the string is the name of the player pref that we're going to use, and our value is the amount that we're putting into it. So our player prefs, the string name, we're going to say this will be our, if we put in quotation marks, high score. And we need to remember the name and remember the exact same spelling and formatting of it all, so that we're able to call it back out later, or earlier, as will be the case in this. So our high score, and the value we're going to set in is high score. It won't let me do it. There we go. High score count. So there we go. So basically this just saves onto the computer itself a value called high score and the amount of high score count. And what we want to do is, the very moment the game starts, we want to check that value and see if it has a number, and then apply that to the high score. So in our start function here, we will just say player. We want to make sure, actually no, the very first time you run the game, there won't be any value within there. So we want to make sure that the game is able to take a score from there if there's one in there, and if there's not one in there, we can just ignore it. So we'll say if not, high player prefs dot get int. Sorry, I'm typing this wrong. Go back here. If player prefs dot get int, what's the name we called it? High score. If that is not equal to null, then we'll say player prefs, high score count. High score count is equal to player prefs dot get float. Oh, that should be get float, not get int. What am I doing? Get float. Player prefs dot get float, and then in brackets high. If I can spell it right, high score. So like I said, you need to make sure it's spelled the exact same way. So that what that'll do is it'll get the value that's stored in there, and it'll say, okay, that's what our high score should be. So we'll save that, go back in here, and once this is all finished compiling out, we should get a fully functional high score system in the game. So as you can see, we were setting our high score and we let ourselves die. So now we've got a high score of 25. That's perfect. Stop the game, start it again. And we can see our high score of 25 has been kept. And okay, so that's fine. So you might have noticed there was a slight little error popped up after we completed that script. I actually used the wrong thing here. What we should have is if player prefs dot has key. So what we're doing is saying if it has a value called high score, and close that bracket. So basically it's saying if there's anything in our player prefs called high score, then we know that we've set it at some point in the game. And if it hasn't, if there's not one of them, then we won't run this little section. It'll just stay as a default of 0. So we'll go back in here and we shouldn't get the same error again this time. Once this is finished going, yep, there we go. So now we've got a fully functional and very straightforward and simple scoring system in our game, and also a very simple high score system. As you can see, our high score has been kept every time. If you wanted to reset your high score at any point, all you have to do is go get that player prefs and set it to 0, the exact same way we're setting score to 0 every time. And it's very straightforward and simple. So there you go. That's the basics of adding a score system to your game. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will be back soon with more Endless Runner tutorial goodness very soon. Thanks for checking out this episode, and if you want even more Games Plus James goodness, make sure you hit those subscribe and like buttons. You can also find me on Twitter and Facebook by following the links on screen, where you can find out all the latest news about the channel. And if you want to help support the show, check out the Patreon page, where you can get exclusive content in return for helping make the channel even better. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.